He said 7 words in Mandarin, then 4 in Arabic, and the room stopped breathing. Nobody in that boardroom on the 43rd floor knew his name. They had seen him every morning for 11 years, pushing a cart through the marble lobby, emptying wastebaskets, wiping down elevator panels with a blue cloth that had faded from too many washings. Some of them nodded at him. Most of them looked through him the way people look through windows. He was part of the building, like the ventilation hum or the security turnstiles. Necessary, invisible, completely unremarkable. His name was Robert Caine. He was 58 years old. He drove a 2009 Civic with a cracked dashboard and a passenger seat permanently reclined because the lever had snapped off 6 years ago and he had never gotten around to fixing it. He ate lunch from a thermos his daughter had given him, the kind with the rubber gasket that sometimes leaked if you didn't tighten it exactly right. He wore the same 4 shirts on rotation, each one pressed the night before with a travel iron he kept on the kitchen counter because he had no ironing board. He was by every visible measure a man who had been passed by. What the 43rd floor did not know, what no one in that building knew except the payroll administrator who had processed his direct deposits for a decade and had never thought to ask questions, was that Robert Caine had once sat on the other side of those kinds of tables. But that was before the diagnosis and the medical bills and the year that swallowed everything whole. Before he sold the house in Bethesda and paid off what he could and let the rest go to the lawyers and started again, quietly, without complaint, in a city where no one knew his face. His daughter Annalise was 17 then. She was 28 now, with a son of her own and a voice on the phone that still sounded like an apology whenever she called to check on him. Robert had never told her what he had given up. He did not consider it a sacrifice worth naming. The Veltman Group occupied floors 39 through 44 of the Carrington Tower. It was a mid-sized financial advisory firm with outsized ambitions, the kind of company that spent generously on lobby design and aggressively on talent recruitment and spoke in public about innovation and transformation while conducting its actual business through a maze of handshakes and favors that went back 30 years. Its CEO was a woman named Catherine Broad, who had taken the helm 4 years ago after the board grew tired of watching the previous leadership drift. Catherine was 51, precise in her speech, and had the particular quality of stillness that people mistake for coldness until they understand it is simply the absence of waste. She did not perform authority. She exercised it quietly and continuously, the way lungs work. The consortium deal had been in progress for 14 months. Veltman was attempting to secure a partnership agreement with the Dalian Pacific Consortium, a Chinese-led investment group with Korean, Emirati, and German co-partners that would restructure and expand Veltman's Asia-Pacific operations. The deal, if closed, would represent approximately $2.4 billion in combined assets under management. It was the largest transaction in the firm's history. It was also, for reasons that would become clear later, the most heavily guarded. The negotiations had required interpreters. Of course they had. The consortium's principals conducted business in at least 4 languages: Mandarin, Korean, Arabic, and German. And while most of them spoke functional English, they preferred to negotiate in their native languages for precision. And, more importantly, for the psychological leverage that comes from making the other side wait for a translation. Veltman had cycled through 7 professional interpreters over the course of 14 months. Each one had been credentialed, vetted, and expensive. Each one had been quietly released after a few sessions for reasons that the senior partners described as fit issues or communication concerns and did not elaborate on further. Robert knew about the interpreters the way he knew about most things in that building, through proximity and silence. Maintenance staff are granted a peculiar kind of access. They are present at the edges of important moments. They exist in the rooms before the meetings begin and after they end. They hear things not because they are listening, but because the people talking have stopped believing anyone nearby is capable of understanding. He had first noticed the irregularities in October. He was cleaning the corridor outside Conference Suite B on a Thursday evening, well past 7, when the door opened and 3 men stepped out to take a call. They spoke in Korean. Robert understood Korean. He had learned it during 31 months working in Seoul for an investment consultancy in the early 1990s. He had also, during the years that followed, picked up Mandarin through immersion and necessity. Arabic through a professor at Georgetown he had studied under before his career shifted direction, and German from his mother, who had come to the United States from Munich in 1962 and had refused to let her children forget where she came from. He was not eavesdropping. He was moving a cart. But the men did not lower their voices because they did not believe the man with the cart could follow them. What Robert heard in that corridor was not casual conversation. He did not act on it immediately. That was not his nature. He went home, ate the chicken and rice his daughter had dropped off the previous Sunday, sat in the kitchen with a glass of water, and thought carefully about what he had heard and what it meant, and what, if anything, a building maintenance employee was supposed to do with information like that. He thought about it for 3 days. He heard more in November. A different conference room, a different evening, a partial conversation in Mandarin between 2 members of the consortium's advisory team that confirmed what he had suspected, then a fragment in German, overheard near the service elevator, that clarified the mechanism. He committed it all to memory the way he had once been trained to, precisely without embellishment in sequence. By December, Robert Caine understood the shape of what was being planned. The Dalian Pacific Consortium was not operating in good faith. 3 of its principals were using the negotiation process as a vehicle to extract proprietary information about Veltman's existing client portfolio. Information they intended to leverage in a competing structure they were simultaneously building with a different partner. The deal was designed to be signed and then stalled. By the time Veltman's legal team identified the breach, the consortium would have what it needed, and the arbitration process would take years. The firm would survive, but it would lose the window that had made the deal valuable in the first place, and it would lose it to the very people sitting across the table. He also understood, with a clarity that came from having watched institutions operate for 3 decades, that the people most invested in closing this deal were not the people who would suffer most if it went wrong. Senior partners had already begun discussing the announcement. There were bonuses attached to signing. There were reputations staked. The pressure to close was immense, and pressure of that kind has a way of narrowing vision. Robert was not a person who made decisions quickly in matters that involved other people's lives. He thought about what he knew, and what he could prove, and who he could tell it to, and what they would do with it, and how likely any of them were to take him seriously. He thought about the fact that he was a maintenance employee, with a cart and a thermos, and no institutional standing whatsoever, and that the information he was carrying had been gathered in corridors and near service elevators by a man pushing a mop. He thought about all of this for 2 more weeks. Then he went to Catherine Broad's assistant on a Tuesday morning and asked for 5 minutes. He had not expected to get them. He had prepared for the possibility of being turned away, of being told to submit something in writing to HR, of being thanked politely and ignored. He had a contingency for that. He had written it all down in a letter addressed to the firm's general counsel and the regional financial regulatory office, sealed in separate envelopes, sitting in the glove compartment of the 2009 Civic in the parking structure. The assistant, a young man named Patrick, who wore very neat shoes and handled his calendar with the seriousness of a military operation, looked at Robert the way everyone looked at Robert. Not unkindly, but with a certain confusion about what this person could possibly need 5 minutes of the CEO's time for. "It's regarding the Dalian Pacific negotiation," Robert said quietly. "I have information she needs to hear before the December 19th signing." Patrick looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up the phone. Catherine Broad saw him at 11:15. She did not ask him to sit when he entered. She was standing at the window looking at the street below, and she turned when he came in, and she looked at him the way she looked at most things, directly, without pretense, making a rapid private assessment and then waiting. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "I'll need about 12, Robert said. "But you can stop me at 5 if you want." She did not stop him at 5. She listened to him the way very few people in positions of power know how to listen, without interrupting, without visibly reacting, without performing skepticism or concern. Her eyes were steady. When he finished speaking, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "How do you know Korean?" "I lived in Seoul from 1991 to 1993, Robert said. "I was working for an investment consultant doing what? Due diligence analysis on regional acquisitions. It was a different career." She looked at him. "And the Arabic?" Graduate work at Georgetown. I studied under Professor Anwar Khalil in the early 90s. He required his students to conduct at least one full semester of analysis in Arabic original texts. I kept it up, and German. My mother. Catherine Broad sat down then. She folded her hands on the desk and looked at the middle distance for a moment, and Robert could see her doing what careful people do. Running the information through a framework, checking for inconsistencies, calculating the cost of being wrong in either direction. If what you're describing is accurate, she said finally, then we are 11 days from signing an agreement that would expose this firm's entire client architecture. Yes, Robert said, and you've been carrying this for how long? About 6 weeks of gathering, he said. 3 more weeks of thinking. She looked at him again, and this time there was something different in it. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of recognition. The look a person gives when they realize the situation is not what they thought it was. I need to have this independently verified, she said. I understand I need you to come back tomorrow morning with everything you remember in writing, organized by date and language and context. Can you do that? I can do it tonight, Robert said. He delivered 31 pages to Patrick at 7:45 the following morning. Catherine spent 2 days having her general counsel and 2 outside security consultants review the information. She brought in an independent interpreter, someone with no connection to the firm, to review the specific phrases and exchanges Robert had documented. The interpreter confirmed what Robert had recorded with the precision of a court transcript. On December 15th, 4 days before the scheduled signing, Catherine Broad convened a private meeting with the members of the consortium she had determined were acting in good faith, the German and Emirati partners, who had not been party to the scheme and who, when presented with the evidence, were quietly horrified. Together they identified the 3 principals at the center of the fraud and began a coordinated process to extract themselves cleanly. The December 19th signing did not happen. By January, the Dalian Pacific Consortium had dissolved its central partnership structure, and 2 of its principals were under review by their home country's financial regulatory authorities. The German and Emirati partners had entered separate, direct negotiations with Veltman, negotiations that were slower and more careful, and in Catherine's private estimation, considerably more promising. The 3 senior partners who had been most loudly advocating for the original deal were notably quiet in the weeks that followed. 2 of them had already received their bonuses in advance of the anticipated signing. The question of whether they had been negligent or something worse was a matter the board was now examining privately with counsel. Robert Caine learned about most of this secondhand. He had returned to his regular schedule the morning after delivering the 31 pages. He pushed his cart. He emptied wastebaskets. He wiped down elevator panels with the blue cloth. On the morning of December 22nd, 3 days after the signing that had not happened, Catherine Broad came to find him on the 39th floor. She did not send Patrick. She came herself in a charcoal blazer, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the cart in the lobby, and she found him restocking supply closets near the east stairwell. "Do you have a few minutes?" she asked. They sat in the empty break room at the end of the hall. The building was quiet that week. People had already begun leaving for the holidays, and the floor had the particular stillness of a place that normally runs at high volume and has briefly stopped. Catherine set a coffee in front of him and said, "I owe you an explanation and also an apology." "You don't owe me either," Robert said. "I do," she said, "because my first instinct when Patrick told me what you'd asked for was to have him send you to HR with a form. And if he hadn't had the judgment to call me directly, which I will be talking to him about, you would never have gotten that 5 minutes." Robert looked at the coffee. "I had a backup plan," he said. "The regulatory letters." He looked up. "General Counsel found the notification in your documentation," she said. "Dated December 2nd. A pause. "You would have gone to the regulators. If no one inside was going to listen, yes." She nodded. It was a slow nod, the kind that means a person is absorbing something rather than simply acknowledging it. "Why?" she asked. "You had nothing to gain. Considerable amount to lose." Robert thought about how to answer that. "I've been on the other side of those tables," he said. "I know what it costs when someone who sees a problem decides it's not their job to say anything." He paused. "And I've been in positions where I wished someone had said something and didn't." She waited. "A long time ago," he said, "I was involved in a situation, different industry, different decade, where something similar happened and nobody spoke up because nobody felt it was their place. A lot of people lost things. Not money, more permanent things. He looked at the window. I promised myself that wasn't something I would repeat, regardless of what my job title happened to be at the time. Catherine was quiet for a moment. "What was your job?" she asked. "Before, I ran an international acquisitions group for a private investment firm," he said. "East Asia focus. We managed about 900 million in assets at peak." She looked at him. "We had offices in Tokyo, Seoul, and Singapore," he said. "I spent most of the 90s traveling." "What happened?" He took a breath. "My wife was diagnosed in 2002. The treatment was aggressive and experimental and not covered. We tried everything that was available. It was..." He paused. "It was a very expensive 4 years. When she died in 2006, there wasn't much left. I liquidated what I could, paid what I owed, and started over. My daughter was 17. He looked down at his hands. "This is a good job. Steady hours, good benefits. I haven't wanted for anything I actually needed." Catherine Broad was not a woman who showed emotion easily. But something in her face shifted quietly and without theater, and she did not say anything for several seconds. "I want to talk to you about something," she said finally. "Not as your employer. As a person who has a serious problem and who has just discovered that the most qualified person she knows to help solve it is the man who cleans the 39th floor." Robert looked at her. "I need someone with exactly your background to serve as an independent analyst on international acquisitions," she said. "It would be a consulting role, not a staff position. The work would be project-based. It would not require you to change anything about your life unless you chose to." She paused. "I'm told you turned down 2 similar approaches in the last decade, from people who recognized your name at industry events." He was quiet for a moment. "I like the work I do," he said. "It's clean, it's honest. There's nothing complicated about it." "I understand that," she said. "I'm not asking you to give it up. I'm asking if you'd be willing to do both, on your terms." Robert looked at the coffee cup in his hands. He thought about the thermos with the rubber gasket. He thought about Annalise's voice on the phone. He thought about the letter he had written on December 2nd, sitting in the glove compartment of the Civic, addressed to people he had hoped would not need to read it. "What would the scope be?" he asked. She told him. It was a reasonable scope. It was, in fact, exactly the kind of work he had once done better than almost anyone else in the business. He asked 3 clarifying questions. She answered them directly, without hedging. "All right," he said. "All right," she repeated. "Yes," he said, "on the terms we discussed." She extended her hand across the table, and he shook it, and neither of them made it into more than what it was, 2 people who had come to a sensible agreement. The break room was quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped. Outside, through the window, the city went on at its usual pace, indifferent and enormous and full of people who did not know each other's stories. Robert finished his coffee. He had supply closets to finish and a floor to check before the end of his shift. He folded his paper cup carefully and placed it in the wastebasket, the one he would empty himself at the end of the day. And he stood, and he nodded to Catherine Broad, and he went back to work. His cart was where he had left it, outside the east stairwell, the blue cloth folded over the handle the way he always folded it. He checked the supply list. He noted what needed ordering. He moved through the corridor the way he always moved, without hurry, without noise, with the particular thoroughness of someone who takes seriously whatever it is he has agreed to do. Nobody on the 39th floor knew what had been decided in the break room. Nobody knew what he had done, or what he knew, or what he had once been, or what he had given away quietly, without complaint, in order to be here. They passed him in the hall the way they always had, with a nod, or without one, their minds on other things. He didn't mind. He had never needed them to know. Some people carry their whole lives in plain sight. Robert Caine had always preferred to carry his like he carried everything else. Without show, without weight that belonged to other people, without the need for anyone to see it and be impressed. He had said what needed saying. He had done what needed doing. The rest of it, the titles, the recognition, the shape of whatever came next, was just paperwork. The elevator opened. He pushed the cart inside. The doors closed behind him and he rode down to the next floor where the lights were on and the work was waiting.